Hello and welcome to Grey Scalp Miniatures. So in today's video I'm going to be showing you the paint scheme that I've been using for these awesome Minotaur warriors by Artisan Guild, and also how to get this really fun and, in my opinion, fantastic looking magical effect armor using just contrast paint and a simple dry brush. So let's get on with the video. So when I first saw these sculpts by Artisan Guild, I wasn't overly interested in them. They just kind of struck me as a bit of an odd in-between place. They're like beastmen type minotaurs, but not evil. So I was kind of wondering where on earth they would fit in any of the armies I was painting up. But then I decided it would be pretty fun to try and paint these up and just experiment with some different things. So first off, I started off with my test print, which was this kind of usual paint style that I tend to stick with, which is like a gold armor and then just all your standard flesh tones. But actually I kind of realized that was quite boring, and I decided for once in my life I was going to try and do something different, and I wanted to experiment with some different colors, and that's where this sort of blue magical armor came from. Now if you've watched any of my painting videos, I tend to stick with contrast paints purely because it allows me to get quite a lot of models done in a relatively quick time frame, especially for these sort of videos. Now that kind of leaves you in a bit of an odd place, especially if you go with metals, because it can look quite cartoony and washed out, and that's where this technique that I experimented with and actually really like has played off massively, and you can do all sorts of different colours if you want to. So first up, let's go through step by step what I did to get these beastie minotaurs looking the way that they do. Now I will be covering off both paint schemes in this one, but the primary focus really is this sort of awesome blue magical type armour that I've gone for. So the first thing to do is get them primed, and I do recommend go for some light colours because we'll be using an oil wash at the end, and with that you don't need to worry too much about the shadows in those areas that you don't reach, because the oil wash will take care of a lot of that. So once you've got them primed up, the first colour that I went with was a Guilliman's Flesh, for the flesh tones, obviously. Now I really like this. It's one of my favourite contrast paints because it does such a good job with literally just one coat. You slap this down and it gets into those shadows and it gives a real good amount of definition when it comes to flesh. I hate painting flesh, or at least I always used to hate painting flesh. But after using this contrast paint, it's completely changed it. I really love it for faces, just for any kind of flesh. This is my absolute go-to. And just one note, I'm not being massively careful with this. The oil wash will hide a lot of my mistakes later on. My brush tends to be loaded a little bit too much with paint, and that was because of the setup I've currently got, where there was a light and a camera getting my way and I couldn't really see how much paint I was getting on there, so I did lose some of that control. But at the end of the day, a lot of those mistakes will be covered up, and one of the great things about contrast paint is it tends to flow into the places you want to. You do need to be careful though, try not to get it onto any places later on, because then you'll end up with some maybe darker spots that you don't want. So once you've got all your flesh down, the next one to go with, depending on if you're going to go for the blue or with the gold. If you go with the gold, Skeleton Horde, it's my go-to for getting down that base really quickly. It comes out with this obviously bony type armor finish, but it's a real good base in my opinion anyway for some gold, and later on you'll be able to kind of highlight that with actual gold metallic paints or do a dry brush. If you're going to go with the more magical blue type armor, the colour I went with is Echelian Green. Echelian Green? Basically, Echelian Green. I'm going to have it on the camera so you can translate my ramblings there. And this stuff, it goes on and looks pretty dark, but don't worry, we'll kind of fix that later on. But it really does a great job, again, of getting the shadows in there, and it looks fantastic. Compared to some of the other like blues and greens, a lot of them are a little bit more washed out. They definitely look as though they belong on a fabric, and other ones are just too dark and they don't necessarily work. This has a bit of a magical feel to it, and I just think it looks fantastic going on there straight away, even without kind of lightening it up and trying to make it look a bit more metallic. Once that's done and you've taken care of whatever armor you're going to go with, and bear in mind if you want to mix it up, you can pretty much use any colour that you want. So if you want to go for like a really reddy armor or something like that, you can use any of the contrast paints and they're probably going to do a really good job, especially when you get to the dry brush stage later on. Let me know if you want me to do a different video about all the different colours that you could use and try and translate those contrast paints into different metals, and I'll see what I can do. But once you've done your metal and you've got your armor down, the next one I went with was a Black Templar. And this is more for things like your kind of these tassels that are coming off of the shield, also the bits that are coming off around the sort of bottom as well and around the waist. In hindsight, especially with the blue, I kind of wonder what that would look like with like a Flesh Tearer's red or Blood Angel's red, but we do have some red and oranges on these models anyway, so it might take over a little bit much. I really like the black, and especially when you get through to the dry brushing a bit later on, you start to bring out some of those kind of the colours and definition as well. So don't worry about it overpowering or just looking flat. It does look pretty good. Now, some of these models also have this sort of like toga and a bit of red shirt and stuff like that. And for that, I used Flesh Tearer's red. It's not too bright, obviously it's not too dark either. It looks nice and it adds a really good contrast either to the blue or to the gold as well. So I think it's a really good one to go with. So I definitely recommend going with that. You could potentially use a lighter color, and I was potentially going to go with that. But then I figured compared to the skin and the flesh tone, and if you do go with the gold armor, then that lighter color is really going to get lost in the detail. So once you've got your Black Templar down, the next one you need to do is just kind of do things like their, I guess, bandoliers. You've got some straps around the arms and the gauntlets as well. You've got a few pouches on there. And for that, I was going to go with Snakebite Leather, but actually I went with Nazdrake Yellow just because I like the way this stands out. Now, the problem with Snakebite Leather, at least that I found, is so if you're using other non-bright colours, so things like your flesh tones and then obviously that skeleton horde as well, it can blend in a lot. I really like Nazdrake Yellow because it just brings out a little bit more detail, and I love the contrast on things like the straps. They tend to be really dark in the middle and then quite light towards the edges, so it just helps them to stand out a little bit. So for pouches, straps, bandoliers, stuff like that, the Nazdrake Yellow is a fantastic one to go with. And if they've got hair on the back of the hooves, some of them have got hair on their head, going with a Gryph-hound Orange, I just really like it. I think it stands out. I can't imagine any other colour on these that would look great. And I just think of those like Highland cows that you see, and they're very orangey and stuff like that. So this just seems to really stand out to me. I slapped it on there, and to be honest, I think the payoff worked really well. Once you've got them to that stage, honestly, they look pretty good already, but they do lack some depth. A lot of the metallics don't really stand out or anything like that, and that is where the next step comes in, which is some dry brushing. Now, if you've gone for the blue, what I went with was this dry skink blue by Citadel, and I've got to say, I really liked it. It starts to bring out a lot of those edges, and it starts to kind of give you that non-metallic metals look without much effort. It's really quick, very easy to do, and with a very quick dry brush, and you can be relatively careless with this if you want to, because it highlights nicely all the other areas, it gets the metal looking really good. If you're going to go with the gold, then using any gold that you've got. I personally used Liberated Gold by Citadel, and it did a good job there. It doesn't look really shiny or overbearing. It just adds a little bit of a sparkle to it, and it also makes it look a little bit more authentic as armor or gold, and maybe with some like bone plating in there as well. So, you know, let your imagination do the rest. So once that's done, your gold is pretty much done, unless you want to go back in and do some really high-end highlights and just do some extra work. So if you've done it with a blue, the next thing to do is to get a simple dry brush of silver. Now this can be pretty much any silver, the brighter the better when it comes to this. Make sure you really get your brush nice and dry, but obviously not too dried out. And what I tend to do is I'll wipe off the first layer on my tissue, and then I'll move it across onto my little paint palette as well, and that stops it from removing all the moisture. You'll probably see me rubbing it against my hand as well, so my hand is getting very colourful, and then you dry brush it onto the model, and this just helps some of those highlights to pop, and again it gives it a bit more of a shine and adds that sort of metallic wear. What I tended to find was it almost looked as though some of that colour is rubbed off, and it had that metallic bit coming out from underneath it, and just added again some authenticity to this actually being some kind of metal armor. Once you're at that stage, you could pretty much call it there unless you want to throw on a wash. Now you could use pretty much any wash that you're used to, depending on your painting style. If you want to blend it with the rest of your army, you go with what suits you. Now I have been having so much fun at the moment experimenting with different oil washes, so I went with a purple oil wash for these. Now when I did the first one, it looked alright, and then I did the next few as well, and I'm not entirely sure if I like it or not. Let me know in the comments. Do you like this sort of odd purple glow and stuff that's coming out from them, or do you hate it? I still can't decide if I love it or if I hate it, so yeah, let me know your opinion. My aim here was that with the oil wash, it would really get into a lot of those sort of, I guess, kind of tattoos or those skin markings that they've got, and I think it did a really good job. I'm just not sure if purple was the right choice for this. Maybe like a red or a brown that would really get in there and bring out some of that detail, but at the end of the day, I do like it. I think I like it anyway, and I love using oil washes. Now with this, I'm going to do a separate video on oil washes, so make sure you subscribe for that. But the simple rule of thumb is to obviously have a mineral spirit. Don't don't mix it with water, you're going to make a very big mess. But get some oil paint, put a tiny amount in, and then get lots of mineral spirits. Keep stirring it until you get it to the consistency that you like the look of. Ideally, it needs to run like water rather than kind of getting globby and sticking on things. And with these, I probably mixed it a bit too much and my oil wash was a little bit thin. But at the end of the day, it works really nicely. Now, I left these to dry for about 30 minutes once that oil wash was applied. And then you go back in with a Q-tip or a makeup sponge and start rubbing off all the sort of excess wash that's on top. Now the great thing about doing this is it gives you more control over where that wash ends up, because it ends up in around all the crevices, and as the makeup sponge kind of goes across the top, it takes off that top layer and restores what you've already done previously, so it gives a really nice look. You can leave it longer if you want to, and then it kind of almost blends it really nicely. And the great thing is as well, you can leave it for, you know, pretty much a day if you want to, and then go back in with a Q-tip and add a little bit of mineral spirits, and then it reactivates that oil wash. So if you want to go back in and you think they look a little bit dark, there's too much purple or whatever color you've chosen, you can go back in with some mineral spirits and just clean it up. Now, I didn't use any varnish before doing that. I don't tend to because I don't leave it for that long, but ultimately some people suggest using varnish. I've personally not had to use it yet, and I've not seen any disastrous effects, so your mileage may vary. Once that's done, I took them off the temporary base, stuck them on this one where I just kind of put some little bits of gravel and everything, and I called it a day. All in all, these were really quick and easy to get painted up. And I've got to say, they did a fantastic job with Artisan Guild in terms of getting these printed. They come off the printer really quickly. They're very easy to remove from the supports. And all in all, they look fantastic. The only place where they lose detail in terms of coming off the supports is sort of underneath the gauntlets and on those straps. There tends to be quite a bit of lost detail, but I've seen that a lot from Artisan Guild prints. There's probably more that I could do in terms of my settings and printer, but they're out of sight, out of mind. You don't really see them, so they don't bother me too much. In terms of painting these, they're really easy to do. There's a lot of raised ridges. All of their weapons are pretty much outstretched, so there's nothing that's covering the chest, or there's no hard to reach spaces. So all in all, these are a very easy to do paint job. And they look fantastic. Once you've got them all done, I've got to say, I am more impressed by these than I thought I would be. Especially those blue ones. I've never really experimented with different coloured armours, and I love the way these turned out. And in future videos, I will certainly be trying out different contrast paints and the dry brush technique just to see what sort of armour effects I can get in the future. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you like them? Do you like the purple wash? Do you like that effect of contrast paint and a dry brush? Now, I know you can do non-metallic metals much better than that, but it takes a lot more effort. And these were really quick and easy to do. It didn't take me long at all to get the whole set done. So ultimately, doing it this way, it really works in my opinion, and it's worthwhile giving a go. Also as well, let me know, do you want me to do different oil wash videos? Do you want me to do different contrast paints and turning them into different types of armor? Let me know what you'd like to see next, and I will do that for the channel. In the meantime, if you haven't already, hit that like and subscribe button and come along for some more 3D printing content in the future, and I'll see you soon.